This video is sponsored by the like button. Did you know that if you smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm, it'll result in me getting significantly more sleep because I'm not up late at night wondering if you smash the like button on my videos? All you have to do is leave a like on this video and it would result in me getting significantly more sleep each and every night, which would result in higher quality content for you guys. And with that out of the way, let's get to the video. But just like my previous video, I need to open this video with a disclaimer because there's this trend going on YouTube where someone reads my title and thinks that they already know what the entire video that took me hours to make is about. They'll take to the comment section and immediately give their take on the situation and then leave my channel. This happened with my Steph Curry video where I literally drew an arrow to Steph Curry in a Warriors jersey, where the title might make it sound like the Clippers have a problem with Kawhi Leonard in the sense that Kawhi Leonard's been underperforming, but that isn't necessarily the case. The problem is a lot bigger than Kawhi Leonard's on-court performance. So what's going on, guys? Your boy Mike here. Really quickly before we get to the content, my podcast Laced Up, featuring Mike Korzemba and Get Like Coop, is giving away a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X when we get 17,000 more subscribers there that turn on our notifications for that channel. And I'm personally giving away a pair of Apple AirPod Maxes to anyone that follows me on Instagram. Now that we get all that out of the way, cue the intro. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? It was only a few months ago. I know it was technically supposed to be a year ago, but if we're really speaking in literal terms, it was literally 8 months ago where the Los Angeles Clippers faced off against the Dallas Mavericks in an extremely heated playoff series. And this playoff series took place in the first round, and it was a lot closer than most people would have anticipated. There was a lot of underlying drama as well, as Paul George was going up against Seth Curry. There were no actual crowds at the time due to the COVID pandemic, and the Dallas Mavericks may have narrowly pulled off a win if it wasn't for the fact that Kristaps Porzingis went down with an injury. Back then, things were significantly different. The Clippers were a number 2 seed, the Mavericks were a number 7 seed. And in addition to that, Paul George's head coach was also the father of his ex-fiancée, which he was playing against in an actual game. Both of those factors aren't necessarily in play here. Crowds are now officially back, and there's even a media circus surrounded around the fact that the Los Angeles Clippers tanked their final 2 games on purpose just to avoid the Los Angeles Lakers. And while I don't necessarily blame them, because let's be honest, facing the Lakers earlier in the playoffs would make for a very challenging foe, and just from pure strategy, I don't blame any team from trying to avoid the Los Angeles Lakers because they're not a true number 7 seed, and even if you are to beat them, it's not going to come without its headaches. But in the case of the Los Angeles Clippers, they literally had to choose between 2 very difficult decisions. Do you try to win out and then face off against the Portland Trail Blazers in the first round, and then potentially meet with the Los Angeles Lakers, assuming that they were able to make it past the play-in and make it past the Phoenix Suns in the first round, assuming that the Clippers are able to beat the Portland Trail Blazers in the first round? Or do you tank 2 games to try to avoid the Los Angeles Lakers altogether? And to be honest, I personally think if they were to have intentionally tanked, which it does look like they did because they lost to the worst 2 teams in the entire NBA, then that would have been a significantly worse decision. The reason for this is there is so much at stake for the Los Angeles Clippers this year that most Clipper fans are absolutely delusional about. And look, bear in mind, I am a Laker fan. I 100% admit that. But as a Laker fan, and I'm sure a lot of Laker fans could attest to this, we have been waiting for the longest time for a legitimate Battle of Los Angeles rivalry. And we were so close to getting that at the beginning of 2019. And we were really expecting that in the NBA playoffs last year. Hell, as a person that does NBA media, it is in my best interest to see a Battle of Los Angeles go down just purely for ratings reasons. So don't sit back there and say, wow, Mike just wants the Clippers Lakers to fail. That's not necessarily true. I want them to succeed. I just don't want them to succeed as much as the Lakers do. The number one question that we were talking about on the podcast was, and I want you guys to let me know in the comment section down below, is did the Clippers actually get better since last year? They moved on from Doc Rivers. Obviously, Doc Rivers had his issues. He made some really bad mistakes in the playoff series in terms of adjustments, and I think that's ultimately why the Clippers lost against the Denver Nuggets. But they brought in Tyronn Lue, who is quite possibly the most polarizing head coach in the NBA, because you either think he is a player's coach that knows how to manage personalities, or you think he is a lame duck coach that was pretty much carried by LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Love to a finals appearance. As a matter of fact, if you think about it, if Tyronn Lue was that good of a head coach, don't you think that LeBron James would have pushed for him to come to the Lakers during the hiring process? Like, we're talking about a guy that literally had a Los Angeles Lakers birthday cake, played for the Los Angeles Lakers, coached LeBron James. So if he was truly that caliber of a head coach, don't you think that LeBron James would have pushed for him? But that aside, there were other additions that were made. Trading for Luke Kennard in order to add some more perimeter shooting, extending Luke Kennard and paying him a 4-year, $64 million contract, which is the exact same amount that Marcus Morris got paid as well, taking a flyer on a former fairly highly productive role player in Nicholas Batum, and of course, re-signing Paul George and really standing behind him despite a really poor showing in the NBA playoffs last year. Now, granted, I want to give Paul George some love and respect because he was dealing with depression. That is a whole different animal, and I really hope he's okay right now. But making that move was not only an extremely gutsy move, but it was also a move that the Los Angeles Clippers didn't really have a choice to make. You see, a lot of people like roasting Kawhi Leonard for this decision to join the Los Angeles Clippers after winning a NBA championship. And if you go back to the summer of 2019, the decision makes a lot of sense. Here's a guy that literally just won a NBA championship during a season where LeBron James was no longer in the East, and the best team out of the West just completely fell apart in the NBA Finals as a result of wear and tear from making it to so many NBA Finals. That pretty much gift-wrapped Kawhi Leonard a NBA championship. And it was a known thing, even when Kawhi Leonard went to the San Antonio Spurs and demanded a trade, that he wanted to eventually go back to California. And most of us assumed that by saying California, he meant Los Angeles. This is a man that was on top of the world during the 2019 NBA free agency, because if you go back to that time, the Los Angeles Lakers were at an all-time low. LeBron James missed the playoffs for the first time in over a decade, and here you have the reigning NBA MVP that got exiled to Toronto, but left Toronto with a NBA championship, who had a major decision to make. And to be honest, joining a team that was able to take the Golden State Warriors to 6 games in the first round off the backs of players like Danilo Gallinari, Montrezl Harrell, Lou Williams, with an established and accomplished coach like Doc Rivers, clearly seemed very attractive to Kawhi Leonard because he would be able to return home, but the Los Angeles Clippers would be his team, as opposed to playing third fiddle to Anthony Davis and LeBron James. And I guess Kawhi Leonard really saw LeBron James playing general manager in LA, and I guess he wanted the same thing. And honestly, I don't blame him. I'm seeing a lot of players, especially in the NFL, that want to be more of a part of personnel decisions. And my criticism in regards to Kawhi Leonard isn't necessarily the fact that he went to the Los Angeles Clippers, rather it's the way he decided to go to the Los Angeles Clippers. You see, Kawhi Leonard had all of the leverage in this situation. The Clippers were desperate for a brand new star in order to at least sell tickets or to make themselves even slightly exciting. As a result, Kawhi Leonard knew that he could get away with pretty much anything, especially if he wanted to construct his own roster around him. And unfortunately, when you make this known and the player that you want on your team the most happens to belong to Sam Presti, well, you're gonna pay a pretty steep price to get what you want. So Kawhi Leonard's first power move, and I guess first general manager-like decision, was the acquisition of Paul George, where he traded not one,
not two, not three, not four, not five, not six,
but 7 first-round picks. 2 of them were pick swaps, so we're going to include them, in addition to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Danilo Gallinari, in order to get Paul George in return. And what are you supposed to do if you're the Los Angeles Clippers? Say, nah, we're just going to continue with our young core that features Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, and our 5 first-round picks? You don't have much of a choice. And it was in this situation that you could tell that Kawhi Leonard knew he had all of this power, and in a sense, I think he abused a decent amount of this power. Because even in the case of LeBron James, who clearly wanted Anthony Davis from the start, even he went on to the Los Angeles Lakers, played with Lonzo Ball and Brandon Ingram, and at least gave them a chance to see if there was any potential to work something out over there. And it was at the halfway point of the season when the Lakers and LeBron James realized that, okay, this isn't going to work out, that they decided to start making attempts to trade for Anthony Davis, which took a year to finally get done, but it was supposed to go down at the trade deadline. And I think trading 7 first-round picks for any player, in addition to 2 good solid pieces, one being a promising young player and the other being a consistent scorer throughout his career, is way too steep of a price in any situation for a two-way star. And it's not the fact that the Clippers should not have acquired Paul George. Rather, I feel like they should have taken a more patient approach where Kawhi Leonard started the first year with the existing members of the Los Angeles Clippers, and as the year continued on and they saw how the market played out, they could then react accordingly. Because as time would progress forward, we would see more and more superstar players switching teams. James Harden would eventually end up on the Brooklyn Nets. Russell Westbrook would get traded to the Washington Wizards for John Wall. Chris Paul would get traded from the OKC Thunder to the Phoenix Suns. And while I'm not trying to play Captain Hindsight, I don't really think it takes a genius to know that if you give up 7 first-round picks, you're pretty much handcuffing yourself to whatever roster that's constructed for the next 5 years, at least in terms of trying to swing a trade. And right away, Kawhi Leonard handcuffed himself to Paul George, but he didn't handcuff himself to the Los Angeles Clippers. And when you contrast this to a situation like the Los Angeles Lakers, who did give up a plethora of assets in order to get Anthony Davis, giving up Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart, and a boatload of draft picks themselves, at least they gave themselves wiggle room in terms of free agency. They signed Danny Green to a very comfortable large contract that only lasted for 2 years. After 1 year, when they felt like Danny Green wasn't worth the investment, they flipped him for Dennis Schroeder, which worked out really well because they had a huge pressing need at the point guard position. Now, when you compare that to the Los Angeles Clippers situation, this is a team that was literally in need of some help as well at the point guard position earlier this year. But they didn't have anyone to trade. Who are they supposed to trade? Luke Kennard, that is averaging 8 points per game, but is getting paid as much as Marcus Morris. Patrick Beverley, that is a brilliant marketer that has this mirage and facade of being a remarkable defensive player, but is also getting overpaid for his services as well. Patrick Patterson, Nicholas Batum, Serge Ibaka. Oh, how about the player that decided to take a pay cut because he wanted to stay in Los Angeles so bad? Let's trade Lou Williams, probably our most loyal player, and a player that said that he'd contemplate retirement if he was traded, for Rajon Rondo, because we're so desperate for point guard help. And I'm not saying that was the wrong move, but I'm saying that this one move, this one strong arm move by Kawhi Leonard, pushing the Clippers to trade for Paul George, giving Sam Presti all of this leverage to pump up the price and pretty much set up the OKC Thunder for the next decade, resulted in a cascade of the Clippers having no choice but to make these roster transactions, and they're pretty much locked in on this roster for at least the next 4 to 5 years. Marcus Morris is there for the next 4 years. Paul George is there for the next 5 years. As a matter of fact, aside from the role players, the core of the Los Angeles Clippers are committed to the Los Angeles Clippers, except for Kawhi Leonard. He can leave if he wants to. Now, with the Los Angeles Clippers being down 2-0 at the Dallas Mavericks, you have to bear in mind that I'm sure there's a lot of Clipper fans that are being optimistic, because there's been 24 times that a playoff team lost their 2 opening home games to an away team, and only 3 of those times were they able to come back and win the series. So my question to you is, if you're Kawhi Leonard, and this is it, this is clearly the peak of the Clippers, I don't see a way that they could get better from here, and you're a first-round exit against the Dallas Mavericks, a team that you were able to beat a year prior. Clearly, your team has regressed, because if I'm being honest, the Dallas Mavericks have regressed as well. They lost their best shooter in Seth Curry, and JJ Redick didn't even play in the first round. Are you really going to opt in and continue to play with the Los Angeles Clippers after creating this monstrosity of a roster that is fully capped out, that has no assets to trade? Are you really going to sign an extension with this team, even though the first year was a disappointment and this year they seem to have regressed? Or are you going to, I don't know, move 4 hours away to San Francisco to play with a Hall of Fame point guard that has already won 2 MVPs and 3 NBA championships, who will be reunited with his Splash brother as well next year, that are pretty much a small forward away from terrorizing the rest of the NBA? If Kawhi Leonard was to do this, he'd be loathed by Clipper fans, I think worse than any other player would be disliked by any other team, because this is an instance where a player literally came in, gutted the entire roster of all of its promising players and its assets, and then left. And bear in mind, Paul George is locked in to the Clippers for the next 5 years. He can't leave. So let me know in the comment section down below, what do you guys think about all of this, and what do you think Kawhi Leonard's decision is going to be? Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.